Good evening, night owls, and welcome to Whisper Crowley. Tonight, I will guide you into a world of darkness, hoping to help you relax and unwind. Perhaps some of you will even drift into a haunting yet soothing sleep. Before we begin, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. And now, we begin. Three years ago, just months before the pandemic began, I worked at a hospital in Seattle. I was there for less than a year in the forensic department, mainly covering a position rather than seeking to stay permanently. It was a very good job offer, but I preferred to be close to my mother, who was going through cancer treatment. Although she was recovering favorably, I didn't like the idea of her being alone for many days during her recovery. That's why I eventually left that job. For 4 months, I went there day after day without fail, sharing the work area with very few orderlies, just one forensic doctor, his assistant, a woman of about 28 years old, and myself. The place was always very quiet. The hospital was large and private, but I don't know exactly why there was a streak of resignations at that time. So they had to cover positions because workers were missing every day, but there were always patients. That's how I got in temporarily. The reason for the resignations never had anything to do with anything paranormal. It was said around there that it was more due to issues with benefits and things like that, so people accepted positions elsewhere. This is important for me to mention, so you don't think that what happened to me was related to people being scared away from their jobs. No, nothing like that. The forensic doctor was a man of about 58 years old, very dedicated to his profession. From the first time, I heard something strange, weird, something that shouldn't be there in the morgue. He made it clear that he never ruled out paranormal events occurring. Yes, I think most of us have heard that from time to time, bodies move properties of human anatomy after leaving this world, which is expected, of course. But I'm referring to unusual noises, footsteps, when there's supposed to be no one around. For example, he accepted whatever happened, whatever we had to hear. It never went beyond that noises, and that was it. He told us we couldn't explain some things, but we shouldn't be afraid of them. They were simply people who didn't want to leave yet, and that's why they were still wandering around down there. I say down there because the hospital morgue was floors below, so we could hear every noise even more clearly. The stairway door, the elevator door. Even if we accidentally left a scalpel resting on a steel tray, you could hear it. You might think I'm exaggerating, but if you don't believe me and someday, hopefully not for bad news or anything, you visit a morgue, pay attention to all the silence that occurs when there aren't many people around. At least in the ones I've been in, that's how I've experienced it. Precisely because of that, one afternoon there wasn't much movement, at least not in the morgue. So when each of us was doing our tasks, I mean the doctor and me, since his assistant was just returning from lunch. She arrives with us at a small office we had next to the room where the freezers and tables were, and she says to us, "Hey, what happened? Why did you take the lady out again?" The doctor looked at me somewhat annoyed and confused, and quickly asked me if I had taken her out. Why, if we had already finished with her? I won't lie to you. I got a bit upset because he assumed I had taken her out when that wasn't the case, and I reminded him that we were both present when I myself put her in her assigned freezer, slid her into the interior, and closed the door. He quickly relaxed his expression. Speaking of his facial expression, as if the anger had quickly left him, and he said to us, "Forgive me, Mario. Yes, that's right, it wasn't you. Judith, you didn't move her either, not even as a joke, right? The assistant, whom we'll call Judith, that's not her real name. I don't know if she still works there, but just in case," she answered no, a bit scared. Maybe because she also felt that the doctor thought it had been her. When the doctor heard her deny it, he asked us to accompany him. We got up, walked just next to that office, and upon entering, indeed, there was the body of a lady who had arrived that morning. A woman of about 40 years old lying face up, but with her hand hanging below the table. We went in to position her properly, while I asked the doctor what had happened then. I didn't think of something paranormal first, honestly. In fact, the doctor didn't either, or at least that was the first thing he wanted to rule out, that it was something of another nature, because he told us, "Guys, in my career, to maintain my good performance, record, reputation, everything you want, you're always going to prefer that if suddenly some body moves from place to place, it seems like they carry, and place it somewhere else. It moves. Or even if some wound reopens, you're going to prefer it to be something paranormal. If you think about it with a cooler head, you'll even realize it has no serious consequences at all. If, on the other hand, some living person, someone with malicious intent outside the hospital, is moving them from place to place looking for who knows what, altering the body, that is serious. So the first thing we're going to do right now is confirm that no one has entered. No door has been opened, neither the stairs nor the elevator. We heard you, Judith, no problem as always when you came down. So no, there's no one hiding." Honestly, I agreed with the doctor then, and now I understand it's true too. He also told us he had heard that sometimes in other hospitals, they even told stories of bodies going missing for no logical reason, excluding any possibility that someone had entered, obviously excluding those occasions where bad people took them. But that in this hospital, it had never happened, fortunately. So after that, he began to tell us something strange. For me, it was the first time I heard someone tell it so close, with only a freezer door separating us from the subject he was telling us about. "Look, Mario, Judith, this body didn't move by the work of the Holy Spirit or any living person. Since the lady arrived, she hasn't wanted to stay in the freezer. You see, when she arrived, I received her about 2 hours before you arrived, and I have a stretcher bearer as a witness who was helping me. When we placed her the first time, not even a minute passed, I swear to you guys, before he and I heard that lady pushing at the door. We quickly opened it. We don't have to wait for anything like that, as you already know, and the lady was as if nothing had happened. She couldn't make any involuntary movement because her head was close to the door, and she had no way to push it, given the way she was lying. It could have been anything, nothing was wrong, but today is the second time she's come out of the freezer. A while ago, when I was alone, and before taking her out of the freezer to work with her with you, I arrived here at the room and the freezer door was open. Not only that, but she was also outside, not on the floor or on the table, not completely outside, but on the rail that the freezer table slides on. I don't know how it happened, but she came out. While he was telling us this, he was putting her back in her place. We didn't know what to say. What could we say? We just listened and waited to finish with that body so she would leave. After that, everyone went about their business. The doctor had his lunch hour. His assistant Judith went to finish filing some reports, and I honestly fell asleep for a while in the office. Judith's voice whispering woke me up. I had fallen asleep leaning with my arms on the desk, sitting in the chair, and when I lifted my face to see her, she looked scared. She was inside the office with the door closed, breathing very agitated. I stood up asking her what had happened, if everything was okay. If you had seen her, seriously, she looked very bad. She tells me, stuttering, "Mario, the lady is walking around." With all the sincerity in the world, all my blood drained at that moment. It's not that I didn't want her to notice that I had really been scared by what she said, but I thought it couldn't be true. It's not possible for bodies to walk after death, not even in the first hour's steps like that, as such, no. But her face, I couldn't doubt what she was telling me. I asked her again what she had seen, if she saw someone else in the room, or how that was. She couldn't say anything. She tried to speak, however. She had a tremendous anxiety attack on top of her, very, very heavy. Each time it was harder to understand her. She collapsed on the floor. Now she was crying. It was clear she wasn't joking or lying. If you had seen her, really, it's one of those times when there's no way to deny that this person saw something, and that it caused such a strong emotion in her. I asked her to wait for me in the office while I looked for the doctor. I was going to check or something. With fear, yes, I could never get rid of the fear, but I had to move. It was true what the doctor had told us. We had to take care of our performance always. When I left the office, and while I heard Judith continue crying behind the door, poor thing, I feel so bad for having left her alone. But I had to go check. Maybe she had seen wrong, another person, or who knows. Just as I was leaving for the hallway, the elevator doors open and the doctor comes out. He sees my face and starts walking quickly toward me asking, "Mario, what happened to you?" I don't know what face I had, but he had noticed it in less than a second. I told him with doubts that Judith had seen something in the freezer room. He was going to go check. He put his hand on my shoulder as if feeling sorry for me because his attitude was like that. He told me, "Of course, let's go, let's see what happened. What did she tell you?" Before I could tell him what his assistant had told me. And because the rooms were very close to where I was, I couldn't tell him anything, because I found it strange to see the freezer room door open, just a little. It was a double door, but one was just centimeters away from being completely aligned with the other and being completely closed. Then the doctor opens that door, and the head of that lady falls out. The one who apparently they had returned to the freezer again and again. It wasn't just the head, but it was as if she were lying on the floor and only her head had been resting against that door. That's why it wasn't properly closed. Both the doctor and I were startled, and almost with a complete jump we moved back, scared of course, and even more so because the appearance of that woman was nothing. And I say this with all the respect in the world, but she looked so strange now. Her eyes were completely open, but she was one of those people who have such big eyes that if they made an effort, it even seems like they're going to pop out, looking upward with her mouth completely open. That was the first time I saw the doctor with that expression, scared. He quickly asks me for help to lift her before someone came, and it could lead to misinterpretations. We carried her. I was afraid she was going to move, and it was also the first time in the professional field that I was afraid of a body moving. I couldn't forget what the assistant had told me. When we placed her on the table to examine her and everything, I began to tell the doctor what Judith had told me, that she had seen her walking. If he looked scared before, now the doctor was much worse. He looked at her with a furrowed brow but very wide eyes, between angry, confused, and scared, and said he believed it. He asked me if I hadn't noticed that each time she was getting closer and closer to the door. I hadn't noticed, but it was true. I asked him, first of all, what we should do with her. Her family hadn't come yet, so we didn't know exactly when she was going to leave. Talk and pray with her. There's no other way, Mario. She's not going to hurt us, I assure you. She's going to keep scaring us like this because she's afraid. Imagine losing your life, not knowing where you are, what happened to you, not seeing anyone you know, and also seeing that they have you in a freezer. Well, if that's it, it must be horrible. That's why she hasn't been able to leave. Now let's leave her here and let's go quickly to Judith. Let's see how she is. After going to the office with her, confirming she was a little better, still a bit agitated but better, she could talk, we asked if she wanted to come with us. But she told us no, that she'd rather wait for us. The doctor and I stayed talking near her. From time to time, we prayed some prayer asking for the lady, and explaining to the body that she had already left, that we were just doing our job, and that soon her family would come, but she had to let us work. It will sound as easy as such a quick solution and everything, but it wasn't like that. We took our time, and my voice was trembling from being in front of that lady. But everything that remained of that day and the next, nothing strange happened to us again with her, and thank God it was like that. I hope you enjoyed the first story. If you did, don't forget to leave a like. But if I didn't do my job well, feel free to give it a thumbs down. Either way, drop a comment and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, let's continue. When I was about 18 years old, I lived in a house near the Denver International Airport with my parents and my 16-year-old sister. One night, I was lying in my bedroom talking on the phone with my boyfriend when I asked him to be quiet for a moment because I could hear something outside. He stayed silent. I did too. And I realized that at my room's window, which was on the second floor overlooking the street, it sounded like someone was throwing small stones and hitting the glass. I didn't end the call with my boyfriend. In fact, I mentioned to him that I was going to check what it was, and he said that was fine, that he could actually also hear the small stones hitting the window through the call. I got up from bed, approached the window, and from below I saw that my sister was standing in the street, making hand signals for me to come down, which meant leaving the house. I thought she had snuck out and wanted me to open the door for her since I assumed she didn't have keys. And if my parents found out, she would be in big trouble. I told my boyfriend about this, annoyed, without hanging up the call at any moment. I told him I would go downstairs to open the door and would be right back. I even took the phone with me. I left my room, and before going down the stairs, the bathroom door that's located before going down to the first floor opens, and my sister comes out of there in pajamas, dressed exactly as she dressed when she was about to go to sleep. I felt one of those chills that can hardly be felt again, unless you live through something this strange again. She looks at me, and I think I passed on my expression to her, because before she looked calm, but seeing my face, she puts on the same expression as me, very surprised, asking me what was wrong with me. Stuttering, I ask her what time she had come in, who had opened the door for her. She asks me how I could ask that since she could barely get the words out. But you called me at my window from outside so I would help you get in. I just saw you," I managed to say. She looks at me even more confused and tells me no, that she had been lying down for a good while. It wasn't possible. I didn't tell her anything. I just walked back to my room and asked my boyfriend if he had heard everything. He answers yes, then asks me if that was a joke on him. Of course, that's when I broke down asking him if he wasn't listening to me, that my heart almost jumped out of my chest. How could it be possible? Then I thought it actually wasn't impossible what I had seen outside, my sister, how she dressed when she went out at that age. It was her, I'm more than sure. At least she looked exactly like her. I asked my boyfriend to stay on the phone with me a while longer, at least until I could calm down. And that's what we did. We talked about something else to get over the scare, and then gradually I forgot about it. The thing is, what I saw outside was definitely my sister, same clothes she always wore when going out, same hairstyle, same everything. But finding her inside the house, already in pajamas, already ready for bed, it just didn't make sense. My boyfriend stayed on the line with me for another hour, just talking about random things until I felt better. But even now, years later, I still wonder what exactly I saw that night. Was it really my sister somehow, or was it something else entirely that just looked like her? The strangest part is that my sister seemed genuinely confused when I asked her about coming in. She had no memory of being outside, no memory of throwing stones at my window. And my boyfriend confirmed he heard the stones hitting the glass through the phone, so I know I wasn't imagining that part. To this day, I've never been able to explain what happened that night. Was it some kind of projection, a doppelganger, or was there something more sinister trying to get me to come outside? I'm just grateful I found my sister safely inside the house, because thinking about what might have happened if I had gone outside to let in whatever that was, it still gives me chills. I never told my parents about this incident. How could I explain something I didn't understand myself? And my sister, well, she probably thought I was just confused or maybe sleepwalking. But I know what I saw, and I know what I heard. Sometimes things happen that can't be easily explained, and this was definitely one of those times. The experience taught me to always double-check before assuming anything, especially when it comes to the people you love. Because sometimes, what looks like someone you know might be something else entirely. When I heard the word cult somewhere, I imagined a black church or some enormous place with demonic statues, pentagrams, and symbols of hell, with people wearing strange robes and such a dry and lifeless personality that they would make you believe that they only had the appearance of human beings. But I was wrong. At least not all of them are like that. Not the one I encountered while I was interned in a hospital, in which I was forced to become a member of. I often had seizures due to an illness I suffer from, and they immediately took me to the hospital when that occurred. I would mentally prepare myself that I was going to be hospitalized for at least a week. They always made me wait and wouldn't let me go until they made sure it was safe. It was tedious and sometimes unbearable, but that time was different. I wasn't given a room to myself, but had to share it with another girl who, although she had a different illness, was similar at least in some symptoms. We spent the day talking about that and other things to the point where we planned to see each other and go out when they discharged us. We exchanged numbers and everything. It was already a done deal. Her mother was always there with her except at night. They didn't let anyone stay with us. Those were strict hospital rules, and nothing could be done against that. Although the nurses said we should sleep as soon as the lights went out, we didn't listen and stayed awake talking about everything in secret. We would turn on the television to watch some movie, but the programming was poor. We would rather fall asleep, so it served some purpose. Everything changed one night when we went to sleep early. The lights hadn't even turned off when we were already sleepy. I'm one of those people who wake up at the slightest noise, and that's what happened when at midnight I heard the room door open. 7 nurses entered. I thought something had happened, but I didn't move. I just stayed static, pretending I was looking at the ceiling, but I watched them position themselves next to my roommate. They woke her up and asked her what age she was. It seemed strange to me because they had all our data. It was evident they knew it. My new friend answered that she was 26, and one of the nurses, without caring how my friend would react, huffed saying she wasn't suitable, and it was a waste to leave her alive, that she didn't deserve her beauty, and a bunch of other insults. From one second to another, each one pulled out a knife and stabbed her while they covered her mouth. The stream of blood reached my bed. Then 2 ladies entered who left the room spotless, cleaned everything while those nurses stood beside my bed. I had my eyes closed, but was praying they wouldn't realize I was awake. 2 minutes later, I heard them say it was better to leave, and they did. When I was alone, I turned to see my friend's corpse. The holes in her body were still expelling blood, but they had pressed the sheets against them so it wouldn't stain more. She was found by another nurse who apparently didn't belong to that group. She screamed uncontrollably and immediately called security, doctors, and all the staff, who took me out of the room as quickly as they could, without a companion or anything. Due to my illness, they ruled out that I could have done it. Besides, cleaning everything was impossible. They investigated but didn't reach any conclusions. I didn't want to tell anyone anything because I was still in the hospital locked up with them, so I kept silent. When night came, I didn't want to fall asleep. Not even watching those boring movies could I fall asleep. I just thought about the way they took my friend's life. It was without mercy, and they didn't care that she suffered. They just looked into her eyes. Seriously, it was something that left me traumatized, afraid even to walk to be able to go to the bathroom. But the thing wouldn't stop there. Those same nurses entered at midnight and told me not to pretend to be asleep, that they knew perfectly well I was awake and that pretending was useless. Out of fear that they would do something to me, I opened my eyes and didn't see knives in their hands, but I deduced they must have had them stored somewhere in their uniforms. They asked my age, and I didn't respond. My lips were trembling. I didn't want to open my mouth, not even to sigh. They repeated the question with a knife to my throat, and then I told them I was 25 years old. They stepped back and said that was the age he wanted for the new one. Again, they threatened me and told me they belonged to a cult that worshipped a demon whose name I didn't even understand. But they paid tribute to him and obeyed whatever he asked of them. I nodded my head saying I would join because of how unprotected I felt at that moment, and right there, they performed a ritual on me. Around me, I observed the lights turning on and off at the same time as the window glass began to crack. This lasted approximately 10 minutes, and then I fainted. When I woke up, it was morning. Sitting beside me were 2 nurses who explained how things would be for me from then on. They discharged me a few days later, and then someone called me for a job interview at that hospital. Since that day, I've been working as a nurse without even having studied it, because I'm threatened along with my family. Obviously, I won't say the location of this hospital, but the director is part of the cult along with most of the staff, and even the authorities are in collusion with this. It's a real hell what we live here. We do atrocious things like what they did to my friend, and we force others to become part of all this, just as they forced me. My name is Officer Rafael Martinez, and I work highway patrol for the California State Police. I've been patrolling the remote stretches of Highway 101 north of San Francisco for about 6 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these lonely roads could throw at me. I was wrong. This happened on a Tuesday night in late October, around 2:30 in the morning. The fog was rolling in heavy from the Pacific, creating that ethereal, almost otherworldly atmosphere that's common along our coastal highways. Visibility was maybe 100 yards at best, and the temperature had dropped into the low 40s. Most sensible people were home in bed, which made the highways perfect for my patrol route. I was driving northbound on a particularly desolate stretch between Petaluma and Santa Rosa when I spotted headlights in my rearview mirror, approaching fast. The vehicle was gaining on me quickly, too quickly for the road conditions. As it got closer, I could make out that it was a dark sedan, possibly a late-model Chrysler or similar vehicle. What immediately caught my attention was that the car had no license plates, front or rear. In California, that's an automatic citation, so I activated my emergency lights and prepared to make a traffic stop. The driver should have seen my lights and pulled over, but instead, the vehicle accelerated even more aggressively. I hit my siren and gave chase. The sedan was moving at dangerous speeds for the foggy conditions, weaving slightly but maintaining control. I stayed behind it, calling in the pursuit to dispatch and requesting backup units to set up ahead of us on the highway. What struck me as odd was how smoothly the car was moving despite the high speed. There was something almost unnatural about the way it glided through the fog, never seeming to struggle with traction or visibility like a normal vehicle would in those conditions. I tried to get close enough to see the driver or any passengers, but the windows were heavily tinted, darker than legal limits allowed. The car itself seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, making it difficult to determine the exact make and model, even though I was only about 50 feet behind it. The chase continued for nearly 15 minutes, winding through the hills north of Petaluma. I was beginning to worry about fuel consumption and the dangerous speeds we were maintaining when suddenly the sedan made a sharp right turn off the highway onto what appeared to be an old logging road. I followed, but had to brake hard almost immediately. There, directly across the entrance to the dirt road, was a heavy steel gate with thick chain-link fencing extending into the forest on both sides. The gate was secured with multiple heavy-duty locks and had warning signs indicating it was private property belonging to a timber company. I sat there in my patrol car, engine running, staring at that gate. It was completely intact, no signs of damage or forced entry. But I had been directly behind that sedan when it turned onto this road. There was no way it could have passed through without destroying the gate, or at least leaving some evidence of its passage. I got out of my car and examined the gate with my flashlight. The locks were old but secure. The chains showed no signs of recent disturbance, and there were no tire tracks in the dirt beyond the gate. The road itself disappeared into thick redwood forest that would make vehicle passage nearly impossible, even without the barrier. I radioed dispatch to report the situation, but they were as confused as I was. The backup units I'd requested were still 20 minutes out, and there were no other roads in the immediate area where the sedan could have gone. I spent another 10 minutes searching the vicinity, checking for hidden driveways or alternate routes, but found nothing. The fog was getting thicker, and the silence was absolute except for the distant sound of waves crashing against the cliffs below the highway. When backup finally arrived, I had to file a report that made me sound like I was losing my mind. I described pursuing a vehicle that had apparently vanished into thin air, leaving no trace of its existence except for my own testimony. My sergeant was understanding, but clearly skeptical. He suggested that the fog might have played tricks with my perception, that perhaps the sedan had doubled back somehow while I was examining the gate. But I knew what I had seen. That car had turned onto that road directly in front of me, and there was nowhere else it could have gone. In the weeks that followed, I found myself thinking about that chase constantly. I started researching the history of that particular stretch of highway, and what I discovered was disturbing. Over the past 30 years, there had been at least a dozen reports of similar incidents. Police officers and civilian drivers reporting encounters with vehicles that seemed to vanish without explanation. Most of these reports involved dark-colored sedans with no license plates, often seen during foggy conditions in the early morning hours. In several cases, the phantom vehicles had been observed driving at impossible speeds or making turns that defied physics. I also learned about a tragic accident that had occurred on that same logging road back in 1987. A family of 4 had been driving home from a Halloween party when their car went through a section of deteriorated guardrail and plunged down the mountainside. All 4 occupants were killed instantly. The car was a dark blue Chrysler sedan. The investigation into that accident had revealed some troubling details. Witnesses at the party said the family had left in good spirits, completely sober and familiar with the mountain roads. The weather had been clear that night, and there was no apparent reason for the car to have left the road. Some locals claimed to have seen the family's car driving those mountain roads on foggy nights years after the accident, always moving at high speed, always disappearing when followed. The stories were dismissed as local folklore, but now I wasn't so sure. I never reported my research to my superiors. It would have looked like I was trying to justify a mistake or cover up an embarrassing incident. But I've continued patrolling that same stretch of highway for years since then, and I've never seen that phantom sedan again. Other officers have, though. Just last year, a rookie trooper reported pursuing a dark sedan with no plates along the same route. Like me, he found himself stopped at that locked gate with no explanation for where the vehicle had gone. Unlike me, he was smart enough to keep the incident to himself. I've come to believe that some tragedies leave echoes in the world, imprints that replay themselves under the right conditions. That family didn't choose to die on that mountain road. They were taken suddenly, violently, with their journey left incomplete. Maybe what we've been chasing all these years is their final drive home. played out again and again in the fog-shrouded hours before dawn. I still patrol Highway 101, still respond to calls, and make traffic stops like any other cop. But on foggy nights, when the visibility drops and the world takes on that ethereal quality that makes anything seem possible, I find myself watching my mirrors more carefully. Because somewhere out there in the mist, a dark sedan with no license plates is still trying to make it home. And those of us sworn to serve and protect will always feel compelled to follow, even when the road leads nowhere and the chase can never truly end. Last year, while I was still in college at the University of Colorado, I would stay up until 4 or 5 in the morning doing homework. This was very common for me, and nothing strange had ever happened to me during the day, night, or at those hours. I don't know from where or how, I swear, but suddenly it happened to me for almost an entire month. I simply couldn't sleep. I would close my eyes and immediately start imagining very ugly things of all kinds. I didn't know where this fear was coming from, whether it was more my imagination or what. But when I did manage to sleep, I always dreamed of purely bad things. Nightmares, rather. I dreamed that people were trying to kill me, that they were breaking into my dorm to rob me, that they were chasing me. But it was always everything happening inside my dorm room. When that month passed, which I attributed to I don't know, some stressful situation. Although at that moment I wasn't really going through anything tense, that time passed. It was slower than anything because I couldn't rest well without understanding what was happening. The following month, things escalated a bit more. On one occasion, I was in my room during the night doing homework when suddenly, from inside one of my dresser drawers, a sound began as if an animal was scratching desperately. I didn't have anything that could make that sound, no pets, and I even thought about some toy or doll that had some function like that. But no. In fact, I didn't have almost anything like that because I had given most of them to my younger cousins, and the ones I still had couldn't possibly do that. So I had to convince myself that maybe it had been a rat, although I was sure it wasn't. The second night that something strange happened to me that month, I was about to sleep at 3 in the morning. I turned off the lights, closed my room door, lay down in my bed, and I quickly felt that at the height of my feet, someone sat down. Of course, with how dark it was, I couldn't see anything. Then I felt that whatever it was moving around the mattress, but always at that height, it didn't reach my upper body. I couldn't manage to do anything else, because suddenly it felt as if something or someone was pulling the sheets. I knew I couldn't simply pretend nothing was happening, ignore it, because there was clearly something down there. But I also didn't feel like I had the strength, courage, or whatever you want to call it to be able to run out. So I started praying everything I knew over and over again, while I felt how they kept pulling the sheet, not slowly or gently, but hard and insistent, as if they really wanted to take it away from me. After a few seconds, I don't even know how much time passed, everything stopped. I couldn't sleep that night. I couldn't get up either. The night just progressed and dawn came. I know I'm telling this without more detail, just as things happened, and that's it. But there's no other way to tell it. That's how they occurred to me from one day to the next, suddenly at night, without warning. Like the following night, when of course I was more than tired from not having been able to rest well. I lay down late at night and heard knocking on my room door. I asked from my bed who it was. No one answered, so I got up, opened the door, and no one was there. I thought about the possibility that it had been my mother or even my brother, but neither of them was awake at that hour, much less playing pranks like that. I said to myself, well, maybe I confused the sound. I dreamed it while being between asleep and awake, and nothing was really happening. If I didn't hear anything else, that would prove me right. And that's how it was I was able to sleep with that in mind for that night. 2 or 3 days later, the same thing. I was just about to sleep, and forgive me for perhaps the repetitive nature of my story. I was looking at my phone to fall asleep when, at the door, as if someone had their mouth pressed to the wood of the door, a little girl was talking. There was never any little girl in our house. I thought maybe the neighbors, but it didn't make sense. It was very late at night. So, what was a little girl doing there? I took the solution of starting to pray for her to go away, and only then did she stay silent. And if you ask me, I didn't understand anything she was saying. It was as if because she had her mouth pressed to the door, you couldn't understand her. Calm down. Nothing strange was happening anymore. I'm going to tell you about an experience I had when I was 30 years old. It was paranormal, of course, but I feel like it wasn't what I would have expected to experience if something like this happened to me, compared to how I've heard it occurs when you see someone who shouldn't be there. Well, I don't want to get ahead of myself. In 2017, my grandmother at 94 years old was such a lively, active, cheerful person. I would see her going up and down as if it were nothing. For that very reason, every morning when I was leaving for work, she would go out to the balcony, sit in one of the chairs we had there, and watch me until she made sure she saw me get into my car. The last week that she unfortunately lived, she spent going in and out of the hospital, that she should always be admitted, that she always shouldn't, that they were simply checkups. And on one of those days when fortunately I happened to be at home while she was there too, she was sleeping, lying in her bed. I remember I said goodbye and gave her a kiss. "See you later, Grandma. I love you," and I left. When I got home that night, I didn't see her. It turned out they had taken her back to the hospital. I stayed waiting for them to return with her, however. This time it wasn't like that. My mom and an uncle called me to let me know that she had passed away. You can't imagine how I cried for her. Days passed her wake, and like every morning, I got up very early to go to work. I left my house, locked it, walked to my car, and before getting in, I saw my grandmother on the balcony, sitting in the chair as she always did. She waved her hand up high, saying goodbye to me. I don't know if it was by reflex or what, but I said goodbye to her too, waving my hand. I got in my car, looked back toward the balcony, and she was no longer there. I realized I didn't feel fear like we expect in some unexplained, paranormal event, but rather joy and happiness to see her again, since I understood that she had done that to be able to say goodbye to me. The moment felt so natural, so much like her. It was exactly what my grandmother would do, make sure I got safely to my car before I left for work. Even in death, she was still taking care of me, still making sure I was okay. What struck me most was how peaceful the whole experience was. There was no sense of dread or supernatural terror that you often hear about in ghost stories. Instead, it felt like the most natural thing in the world, like she was simply keeping up her daily routine of watching over me. I think about that morning often, especially when I'm having a difficult day. It brings me comfort to know that somewhere, somehow, she's still looking out for me. The love we have for our family doesn't just disappear when they pass away. It continues in ways we might not always understand. Some people might say it was just my grief playing tricks on me, that I saw what I wanted to see because I was missing her so much. But I know what I experienced. I know the feeling of peace and love that washed over me in that moment. And I know that my grandmother, being the caring woman she was, would absolutely find a way to say one final goodbye. That experience changed how I think about death and what might come after. It gave me hope that death isn't really the end, that the people we love find ways to let us know they're still with us, still caring for us, even if we can't always see them. I never saw her again after that morning, but I didn't need to. That one moment was enough. It was her gift to me, a final goodbye, a final I love you, and a final assurance that everything would be okay. Even now, years later, whenever I leave my house in the morning, I sometimes glance up at that balcony, hoping to catch just one more glimpse of her. But I know that morning was special, a one-time gift that I'll treasure forever. Nine years ago, I had an experience that still haunts me to this day. I was working for my uncle, who held a position with the county government in rural West Virginia, helping distribute aid to isolated communities scattered throughout the mountains. It was decent work for a college student. He'd pay me to accompany him on these runs, delivering food, supplies, and prepaid cards to families who lived hours away from the nearest town. On this particular day in late November, my uncle had meetings with other officials, so he sent me out with his longtime friend Robert, a guy in his 50s who'd been making these supply runs for years. Robert was reliable, knew every back road in 3 counties, and had become like family to us over the years. We'd already hit most of our stops by mid-afternoon, small communities tucked into hollows and ridges, places where 20 families constituted a decent-sized settlement. But there was one location left, a community called Ravens Hollow that sat way back in the mountains, right near the border between West Virginia and Virginia. "This one's gonna take us about 2 hours just to get there," Robert warned me as we loaded the last of our supplies. "That's why your uncle didn't want you going alone. If we break down out there, there's nothing but forest for 30 miles in any direction." He wasn't exaggerating. Once we left the main highway, we were immediately on gravel logging roads that twisted and climbed through dense woodland. After about an hour of bone-jarring driving, we came to a fork in the road. The left branch continued much the same as what we'd been traveling, rough, narrow, carved out of the mountainside. But the right branch looked significantly better maintained, smoother, with what appeared to be telephone poles running alongside it. "Why don't we take the right fork?" I asked. "Looks like it's in better shape." Robert glanced where I was pointing but shook his head. "That's not our road," he said simply, and took the left fork. As we continued our difficult journey, I kept catching glimpses of that other road through the trees. It ran roughly parallel to ours, maybe half a mile away, and those tall posts I'd mistaken for telephone poles were clearly visible. They looked substantial, evenly spaced, like markers of some kind. "Those posts on the other road," I said. "What are they for?" Robert's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Just focus on the road ahead," he muttered. When we finally reached Ravens Hollow, the folks there were incredibly grateful for the supplies. It had been a rough season for them, and the winter was coming in hard. We spent about an hour and a half distributing everything, collecting the necessary paperwork, and just visiting with people who rarely saw outsiders. As we were getting ready to leave, I climbed up onto the tailgate of Robert's pickup to get a better view of the surrounding area. That's when I spotted something that made my blood run cold. The other road, the better maintained one we hadn't taken, also terminated at this community, just approaching from a different direction. But more importantly, I could now see those posts clearly, and they definitely weren't telephone poles. They were massive stone figures, at least 12 feet tall, carved from what looked like local granite. Even from a distance, I could see they were humanoid in shape, standing like sentinels along that road. There had to be 15 or 20 of them that I could count. "Robert," I called out, "what are those statues over there?" Both Robert and the community leader he'd been talking to turned to look at me, their faces going pale. They exchanged a look that told me I'd stepped into something I didn't understand. When we got back in the truck, I pressed Robert for an explanation. Why couldn't we take that road? It's obviously in better condition, and it leads to the same place. For the longest time, he didn't answer. Finally, as we started back down the mountain, he said, "That road isn't for visitors like us. It's for the people who live deeper in these mountains, in places you won't find on any map." "What do you mean?" Robert was quiet for another long moment. Then he told me a story that made my skeptical, college-educated mind reel. "About 15 years ago," he said, "some federal health officials came through here, said they were conducting a vaccination program for the isolated communities. After they left, a lot of people in the deep hollows got sick and died. The survivors, they blamed the government, said we'd poisoned them deliberately." He paused to navigate a particularly rough section of road before continuing. "Those statues weren't there before that happened. The mountain people built them afterward, using techniques nobody understands. Old knowledge passed down from their ancestors. During the day, they're just stone. But after dark, as if on cue, I glanced through the passenger window toward the other road, now visible through a gap in the trees. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the mountainside, and what I saw made me grab Robert's arm. The statues were moving. I don't mean swaying in the wind or shifting due to some optical illusion. These massive stone figures were walking back and forth along that road, patrolling it like guards. Even from our distance, there was no mistaking their movement, the ponderous, deliberate steps of beings that shouldn't have been able to move at all. "Jesus Christ," I whispered. "Now you see why we don't take that road," Robert said grimly. "Local folks can pass through during the day, but strangers, the mountain people don't want strangers on their road, especially not government people." As we watched, the moving statues seemed to notice us. Several of them stopped their patrol and turned in our direction. Then, to my absolute horror, they began leaving the road and walking directly toward us through the forest. Robert gunned the engine. Our truck lurched forward, bouncing violently over the rough road as he pushed it as fast as he dared. I kept looking back, expecting to see those stone giants crashing through the trees behind us, but they never appeared. Whether they'd given up the chase or simply couldn't keep up with our vehicle, I'll never know. We didn't speak for the rest of the drive home. When I finally told my uncle about what we'd seen, he just nodded wearily. "Robert told me you'd finally seen them move," he said. "He's been making these runs for years, always wondered when someone else would witness it." "What are they protecting?" I asked. My uncle looked out the window toward the mountains. "Some secrets are meant to stay buried in these hills," he said. "Some communities want to be left alone, and they've found ways to make sure that happens." I never went back to Raven's Hollow. Part of me wants to return someday, maybe during daylight hours, to see those statues up close when they're just stone. But another part of me, the part that remembers watching them walk through the gathering darkness, knows that some mysteries are better left unsolved. The mountains keep their secrets, and sometimes those secrets have guardians made of stone and ancient fury, watching over roads that strangers should never travel. I want to share an experience that was brief to tell, but robbed me of peace for quite some time. Back in 2003, I had serious problems with my family. I had just turned 21, and everything that happened made it impossible for me to stay at home. Things weren't good enough for staying to be an option. Fortunately, I'd been working since I was 18 and had managed to save up a decent amount of money. Well, decent for an emergency like this. It wasn't luxury money or anything like that, but combined with my job, which thankfully I didn't lose, it was enough for me to move into an apartment complex here in Phoenix, near the downtown area. The thing is, I moved without having any references, without knowing if it was a good place or not. But I had to start living somewhere that very day, or I would have spent the night on the street or in a hotel, and I didn't want that. That's how I ended up at this apartment complex. I don't know how these things work, but I don't want to give this place a bad reputation either. The lady who rented to me was the sweetest person and helped me a lot, which is why I won't mention exactly where it was. The point is, that same day I was able to start renting there. The lady took pity on my situation, and I got one of the 4 small apartments in that complex. There were 2 in the back and 2 almost at the entrance, with a courtyard in the middle. I know that if I hadn't been so exhausted that day when I arrived, just arranging my few belongings where I could, and lying down in that small but very comfortable apartment, if I hadn't slept that day, I would have noticed from the first night what I heard the next day. I came home from work to summarize everything, and by nighttime I had eaten, brushed my teeth, and gone to bed. That's when I heard someone in the bathroom, which was about 12 feet from my bed. I say someone because who else could be doing that? Opening the doors of a small medicine cabinet that was above the sink. It sounded like they were moving things around in there, the few things I had. Mouthwash, boxes of baking soda, things like that, as if they were rummaging through them, and then they closed the doors. Of course, I was scared. I thought someone had broken in. But then I realized that couldn't be possible. How could a person have gotten in when I had been in the bathroom just 10 minutes earlier? I got up, walked to the bathroom, asking out loud if anyone was there. No one answered. I reached the bathroom, grabbed the handle, opened the door quickly, and it was dark. There was no one there. I also opened the medicine cabinet, and everything was in order, just as I had left it. There were few things, so of course I remembered how they were arranged. That night I thought I had imagined the sound. It had been very clear to me, but what else could I do? The problem was that this happened to me the next day. Exactly the same thing, hearing someone open the medicine cabinet, because the doors creaked. It was already an old fixture moving things around, closing them again. And I still got up to check, and the same thing as the night before, everything in order. That night I was able to sleep only because I thought it might have been the neighbor, that maybe that sound had come through the small bathroom window. That's the only reason fear didn't overcome me. The next morning, when I left my apartment, I walked around to the back of the complex, since I had gotten the one all the way in the back on the right. I walked around to check and reassure myself, hoping to see something there that would connect my bathroom window with the neighbor's. But being the one in the back, it only connected to the complex's wall. and behind that wall there was an empty lot. That same afternoon from work, I called the lady who rented to me. The truth is, I felt very embarrassed that it might sound like a complaint, especially since she had accepted me that same day. But she didn't take it that way. In fact, she told me, "Young man, I'm very sorry, but you should know that you're the third person who has told me that something strange happens to them in that apartment. Only one tenant lived there for about 8 months or so, and never said anything to me. I hope nothing happened to her, and that's why I offered it to you. I thought everything had calmed down. Look, don't worry. If you want, move to the one across from it today. It's vacant and has the same layout. Don't worry about it. I'll figure out how to fix that apartment later." I accepted the change, and everything was normal from then on. I moved again after a few months when I found something closer to my work. When I was leaving, I did ask the lady about what had happened, but she told me she didn't know. She said other tenants had always told her they always heard, as if there was someone else in the apartment, that they were there with them, whoever was renting, in the kitchen, in the living room, or in my case, in the bathroom. That apartment complex is still there. They remodeled it years ago, and it looks very nice, but I don't know if what happened to me is still going on there. Today, I dare to share this story, taking advantage of some themes I've heard about and knowing there's space for them here, because it was truly horrible. I'm originally from El Paso, and in 2009, I had to move to Houston. I had found a job there, and between complex issues that if I told them wouldn't have much to do with my story. The point is that a friend offered to let me stay in a house his family had while they sorted out my situation. But I had already left El Paso, so I needed somewhere to stay. That's why I stayed there for a while. I expected it to be a week, according to what they told me at my new job. And fortunately, I had that friend who let me stay in that house since his family didn't live there, but it belonged to them. When I arrived at the neighborhood gardens of Westchase in the Westchase area, that house was inside an apartment complex. I'm not lying if I tell you it scared me. The street where it was located was all dirt road. The only thing I remember in detail from there is that it was 1 block from Azalea Street, and I stayed there in that house for about 5 days. In that very old, neglected complex, I never saw people outside their houses. They never came out. I knew people did live there because occasionally I heard voices, just very far away, as if the walls were very thick or I don't know. But from the first night I arrived, I noticed that only in the early morning hours was when I heard many people walking outside in the complex. Of course, I didn't look out. They would wake me up, but I didn't want to seem like a busybody, a gossip. In fact, my friend recommended that on the first day I buy what I needed and not go out so much because the neighborhood was pretty rough in terms of security issues, mainly. On the 6th day was when everything happened. They knocked on my door around 7 in the morning in a way that because of how loud it was, I thought they were going to knock it down. Then I heard people shouting, telling me to come out with my hands up. I opened the door very scared while I heard and saw police. Many police in the complex, from one side to the other, followed by a lady and a man telling them that I had just arrived, that I was known to I don't know who. And they took me outside the complex along with those people who I don't know why defended me from the police. From what? I didn't know either. Being out there, They moved all of us to the corner. And that's when I realized that there were easily 7 to 10 police vans and patrol cars. They were already cordoning off the area, many police entering, pointing, shouting, then kicking down doors. We could hear them even from the corner since the doors were aluminum or metal. I asked those people what had happened, and they told me they also lived in that complex. They knew my friend's family, and that's why they were able to help me not get involved in what they had found in the last house at the back of the complex. These people told me they knew they had people there against their will. That's why they always locked themselves up. They were people who were carrying out this operation, and they didn't know when they had gotten into doing this there. But at night was when they brought them in. They never stopped bringing people. They left them there, and that day they hadn't found the people responsible in that complex. They were never there, according to these people, but it was a safe house, as they're called. However, that afternoon, not only patrol cars arrived, but also trucks from the medical examiner's office, because right there in that complex where I stayed for almost a week, they had not only found people in terrible conditions, tied up, without food or water for weeks, being there against their will, but many bodies that were already lifeless, also in conditions I can't mention and wouldn't have liked to know about. Everyone was sharing that same space, the same area, between the living and the remains of those who they not only brought and left there for I don't know how long. The police later gave me my suitcase. It was the only thing I had brought, and after they found out that the rest of us had nothing to do there, that they already knew who was doing this, as these people also told me, I left that same day to Houston, paid for lodging elsewhere, and my friend didn't know what to tell me. He was shocked too, and I never found out anything more about that complex. Here, fear is distributed in many ways. Both the paranormal and what isn't are very different fears. One is never more than the other. They're not even equal, but they do terrify us equally. These stories are just some experiences that are told and will continue to be told in these places. I lived for more than 3 years in an apartment complex in East LA, and it wasn't until my last few months living there that something happened. It was a fairly large complex with a shared courtyard, like many others' houses lined up on the left side and the courtyard on the right. In total, there were about 6 apartments, mine being the third from the entrance toward the back. Honestly, nothing strange ever happened to me there. I spent most of my time out on the street, working almost all day, and since I didn't know my neighbors that well beyond Mr. Rodriguez, who lived next to me, an elderly man in his 70s, a family with mom, dad, and a small child in the first apartment, a guy about my age in the second, and those in the last 2 apartments. Those last 2 were always the ones that frequently changed tenants. The rest had been living there longer. It turns out that one night I was already asleep when a scream woke me up. I sat up in bed, and that scream had come from the complex's courtyard. It was from a woman. As I was putting on my shoes and turning on the light, I heard my next-door neighbor come out, Mr. Rodriguez, the elderly man. I could hear him asking the girl who apparently rented in the back, and I saw her when I came out of my apartment. I watched as this young woman was trying to tell Mr. Rodriguez something, very agitated, nervous, her face completely red. The old man was trying to calm her down, asking her what had happened, to calm down, if there was someone inside. She was gripping the old man's arms, and I seriously thought she was going to faint at any moment. She was very scared, the poor thing. She looked younger than me, about 22 to 25 years old. Stammering, she was saying something about a lady, that upstairs, that the lady. And Mr. Rodriguez kept telling her to calm down, that we couldn't help her if she didn't tell us what had happened, asking if she wanted him to go in and look. But no, the young woman told him no, that she had seen a lady hanging from the ceiling with a rope. That day I got so scared just seeing her like that, knowing that just a few apartments away from mine she had seen that. If you had been there, you would also know that this girl wasn't lying. She was clearly very distressed from seeing that, and even missed her. Rodriguez fell silent, didn't say anything, and asked the girl something else. "Miss, do you have any family who can come for you so you don't have to spend the night here?" That's when I offered, saying she could spend the night with me. She seemed like a calm person with no bad intentions, but the old man insisted that she shouldn't spend the night here, that she had been very frightened and could get sick. The girl said yes, that she could call her boyfriend. And that's what she did while she stayed with the mother from the family in the first apartment, waiting at the complex entrance. Meanwhile, the father from that family came over to Mr. Rodriguez and me, asking what had happened. The old man responded very angrily, telling him and me, "It's that beam in the ceiling, a wooden one that I've told the landlord to remove a long time ago. It's a very old one from the old construction that connects the last two apartments. That damn beam has always been the problem." He asked the young woman from that apartment if we could go in to check before she left. She said yes, and Mr. Rodriguez asked us if we wanted to see it. The three of us went in, walked through the apartment, entered the bedroom, and the old man pointed to a ceiling beam placed right above the bed. A wooden beam that did indeed look very old compared to the rest of the apartment. "This is the one I'm talking about. I don't know why they don't want to remove it. The landlord says it's to respect the old construction of another complex that was here many years ago, and I don't know what else. But do you know why it stopped being another complex when he bought it? Because right there, just like that girl saw it, a lady hanged herself a year before I started renting from the owner of this place, about 20 years ago. When I arrived later, he told me himself. This isn't the first time they've seen her. Let me tell you, but this man says it's all made up, that people always imagine it, and I always ask him why he thinks people don't last long renting these two apartments, and he doesn't say anything anymore. But what fault do people have? That's why this girl isn't going to last long here. Just imagine seeing that lady hanging from that beam. God forbid. Seeing that piece of very old wood while the old man was telling us this, and imagining it was one of the worst things, along with everything that had happened earlier that I experienced regarding the paranormal. And I didn't even see her. I can't imagine what that girl felt. Mr. Rodriguez was right. We never saw her again. I found out they had come for her things the next day, and that apartment, for as long as I stayed there, was never rented again. I don't know if it exists to this day, but it's near a street where I think many people might know it, where there's currently a large altar with a glass case, and everything on a corner with a St. Jude statue, very close to there. What would you have done if you saw this? How many nights do you think you could have endured there after this? It's very curious how many stories have been told about strange happenings in old neighborhoods. And today, I'm sharing one of mine from many years ago. Back in 1999, in an old district of San Antonio, Texas. In those years, I lived with my wife. We were renting small wooden houses, what they call shotgun houses, that you can still see many of in that neighborhood today. My wife and I had been renting there for just a month, near Magnolia Avenue. It was just an elderly lady in her 60s, my wife and me. One house belonged to the owner, but he was almost never there. After that first month of getting familiar with our schedules, both ours and our neighbors, and seeing the landlord at least once a week, he would just come to his house, take a look around, and leave, like he only had that house there just to have it. He never stayed. One night around 11 or so, I went out to the patio. It was a shared patio, of course, that was mostly overgrown grass and weeds, where there were several meters of just open ground like that, an abandoned grill over there, the remains of a swing set, I remember well, like they never used that part of the patio. I was there outside my house, sitting in the doorway smoking a cigarette, when I saw, precisely in that part I'm telling you about, a woman. She was a girl of about 25 to 28 years old. I don't know, somewhere around their blonde, very pale skin. And forgive me if this sounds crude, it's not my intention, it's just the description, but she was dressed provocatively. And look, it's not that it matters for the reasons you might imagine, but you'll see why I mention it. I saw her there in the back, walking, and just barely, because it was completely dark, and I wouldn't have seen her if it weren't for the fact that suddenly I saw a little light over there in the darkness of the patio. She was also smoking. That's why I turned and saw the flame, then her just barely. I went into my house. I didn't want to bother her because I quickly thought that maybe that woman was with the owner. He was married, so you know what I thought. I believed that if she was with him, maybe she was his mistress, and I didn't want to be a witness to anything. I went in and told my wife, and she looked out, moving aside a piece of the curtain, not too much so we wouldn't be seen, and she told me she also saw her. That's when we began theorizing about whether she could be with the owner. If not, then with whom else? We had never seen her, and no one else lived there. That night passed, 2 more days, and I went out again to smoke a cigarette in the patio. I went to close the complex gate, came back, and there in that part where all the weeds were, near the wall where the complex ended, I saw that little light from the cigarette flame again, and then the woman. It was almost as if that light let itself be seen first, and then her, walking toward my house. Calculating that this woman would be about 30 feet from me, I greeted her. "Good evening, excuse me." But she continued with her business, didn't respond to me. Well, what could I do? Better that way. I went into my house, locked up, and the next day I ran into the neighbor before we left for work at the complex gate. "Good morning, neighbor, how are you? Listen, excuse me, but yesterday and a few days ago I saw a woman over there in the patio." I told her what you've already heard, and she responded with something, but occupied. "Oh, young man, don't tell me she didn't scare you. Forgive me, I haven't been able to put out her candle, and maybe that's why she lets herself be seen." I was very confused. I asked myself what that meant. So I asked the neighbor what she was referring to that I didn't understand. "Didn't Don Mario tell you anything about her, the girl from the patio?" "No, he didn't tell me anything." "What are you referring to? The blonde I told you about, does she come with him?" "What candle, ma'am? I'm really confused." "I'm going to tell you something. But don't be scared because I see that Don Mario didn't tell you anything. You see, here in these houses, do you see back there where they covered that wall? Well, through there, this land, before they built and divided this up, it was all cantinas, man, all dive bars. So around here, they connected like secret passages to take out girls, hide people from the bar, and bring them to private rooms. You understand me? And well, what can I tell you? According to what Mr. Mario told me, they did very ugly things here, and many women dedicated to selling their bodies. Well, they took their lives from many here. I really hoped the neighbor would say it was a joke, a very bad and heavy one, of course, but contrary to that, she told me, "Don't be scared. Look, I look over there, and I put a little candle whenever I can, enclosed ones so they don't fall and make a disaster. And whenever I leave one there, the girl stops being seen. You might not believe me, but you already saw her. She passed away a long time ago, neighbor." She was telling me this while pointing to a small place against the wall where there were indeed remains of candles on a stone. Something I hadn't seen since everything looked abandoned. You know what? I think someone blows out my candles, knocks them over, or hides them from me. I don't know. It's not the wind because they never appear, the new glass candles, heavy ones. How are they going to blow away and not be on the ground? I feel something. This is just my thing now, so they can rest. That was the last thing the lady told me. It seemed like too much to me, but the truth was that even my wife had seen her through the window, and I had seen her twice. However, of course it scared me, so we covered the windows with curtains at night. I no longer went out after arriving, and 2 weeks after that, avoiding the night outside in the complex completely, we found a better place. My wife was pregnant, so we had to move. I went a long time without passing by that complex again, until on a trip I had for business near there, I detoured to see how it was, and I was surprised to see that they had covered it with rubble. I went to that business, did my work thing, and asked a guy who worked there what had happened to the complex. He told me that a few months ago the whole land had burned, the houses, and the good thing was that no one was hurt, but they never built there again. They just left. I don't know if it was an accident. He didn't know either what happened, but I was left wondering about what the lady said. If someone had done something with those candles she always put for that girl. Now I really started believing in ghosts because of her. If someone burned it intentionally, if it had something to do with a candle, or if it was simply something else. I was also left thinking if that girl, in that land that the last time I saw it was all rubble, would still be appearing there. My name is Julian Ortega, and I'm a biologist specializing in chiropterology. A couple of years ago, I embarked on a project to study bat behavior in the Mammoth Cave system of Kentucky, a region rich in biodiversity but scarcely documented. What began as scientific research transformed into an experience that marked my life forever. In June 2023, I arrived at the community of Cave City, located near Mammoth Cave National Park, with support from the University of Kentucky and collaboration from the local community. I set up my base of operations in a small cabin near the forest. My objective was to study the bat species that inhabited the caves of the region, document their behavior, and contribute to their conservation. During the first days, I toured the area with the help of Don Mateo, a wise old man who knew every corner of the cave system. He showed me several caves where bats were known to live. One of them, known as Silent Cave, especially caught my attention due to its depth and the large number of bats it housed. I began conducting nightly observations using ultrasonic recording equipment and night vision cameras. Bat activity was intense, especially of species like big brown bats and little brown bats. However, I noticed unusual behaviors. The bats seemed agitated, changed direction abruptly, and avoided certain areas of the cave. One night, while reviewing recordings, I heard strange sounds that didn't correspond to bats: metallic knocks, human murmurs, and what seemed to be the dragging of heavy objects. Intrigued and worried, I decided to investigate further. The next day, I returned to the cave during the day when the bats were resting. I advanced cautiously, going deeper than the areas I had previously explored. As I went deeper, the air became denser and the silence more profound. In a hidden chamber, I found evidence of recent human activity: extinguished candles, food remains, rusted tools, and strange symbols painted on the walls. The place emanated a feeling of unease difficult to describe. I decided to document everything with photographs and detailed notes. When I left the cave, I met Don Mateo, who, upon seeing my expression, asked me what I had found. I told him what had happened, and his face became serious. Don Mateo took me to his house, and after making sure no one was listening, he told me a story that chilled my blood. He spoke of an ancient sect that, according to local legends, performed rituals in the caves to communicate with dark entities. These practices had been prohibited decades ago, but some believed they still persisted in secret. He warned me to stay away from the cave and not talk about what I had found. However, as a scientist, I felt the responsibility to investigate and report any illegal or dangerous activity. That night, while reviewing my notes and photographs, I heard noises outside the cabin. When I looked out, I saw shadows moving among the trees. My heart raced, and I decided to pack my things and abandon the place at dawn. I returned to the city and presented a detailed report to environmental and security authorities. Although they promised to investigate, I never received news about the results of their inquiries. Since then, I've continued my work in other regions, but the experience in the Mammoth Cave system left me with an indelible mark. I learned that sometimes nature and human beliefs intertwine in mysterious and dangerous ways, and that as scientists, we must be prepared to face not only the unknown, but also the shadows that inhabit the darkest corners of our world. 7 months passed since I left the Mammoth Cave area. During that time, I limited myself to working from the laboratory, writing articles and reviewing data. But every night when I closed my eyes, I remembered that hidden chamber, the symbols, the noises, and the shadows. In February of the following year, I received an unexpected call. It was a colleague from the Biology Institute who had been assigned to the same region to conduct a census of small mammals. He asked me if I knew Silent Cave because local guides refused to approach that area. I lied. I told him I had barely visited it, that it was unstable, that it wasn't worth it. But I hung up the phone with my heart beating hard. Something there was still wrong, and for some reason, no one was willing to face it. I couldn't take it anymore. I packed my equipment and returned. I went back during Easter week when most researchers leave the field. I didn't notify anyone. I stayed in Bowling Green and walked 2 days to the community, avoiding Don Mateo and anyone who might recognize me. I reached the cave at nightfall. The air was still thick, and something seemed different. The vegetation at the entrance was trampled as if there had been frequent traffic. I entered slowly, carrying a red light flashlight to not disturb the bats. I found nothing in the first chambers, but when I reached the site where the symbols used to be, I discovered that the paint had been scraped off. Everything had been cleaned, too clean. A thick silence filled the place. I advanced through a passage I hadn't noticed before, probably because of the fear from the previous time. The tunnel descended at impossible angles, almost as if someone had carved it by hand. And then in an underground room, I saw the unthinkable. There were bodies, not complete corpses, remains, bones meticulously arranged as if they were part of a collection. Jaws labeled with dates, stacked femurs, skulls, some too small to be from adults. Everything arranged like a macabre exhibition. And there was a table. On it, rusted surgical instruments, a recorder turned on, and a notebook. I opened it. It was full of scientific notes written with obsessive precision. But they weren't about bats. They were human observations. Procedures, reactions, behavior studies under fear stimuli. I saw my name on a page among the notes. Julian Ortega will return. Curious. Possible witness. Evaluate. I was paralyzed. Who knew I was going to return? How long had they been watching me? While I was backing away, the recorder clicked. There was a recorded voice. It was mine, repeating things I had never said out loud. Conclusions, dates, internal thoughts. Someone had recorded me during my stay. My legs trembled. Then I heard something behind me, not the flapping of wings, but breathing. Several, in silence, dark. I didn't manage to see them clearly because I ran out. I don't remember how I managed to get out. I crossed the forest at night, lost equipment, tore my clothes. I reached the road at dawn where a truck carrying corn picked me up. Today I live in the city, far from caves, far from forests. I left the university, not because I'm afraid of the unknown, but because I understood something much worse. The most terrifying thing isn't what we don't understand, but what others understand perfectly and hide with surgical care. I'll never know who was in that cave or why they did what they did. But I was part of their experiment. I was observed, measured, calculated, and maybe I still am. Because sometimes when I turn on the radio at night, between the static I hear my own voice, saying things I haven't said yet. My name is Sarah Castellanos, and I grew up in San Diego before moving to Portland, Oregon, when I turned 19. My mother had relocated there for work, and after some family difficulties, mainly conflicts with my father's new wife, I decided a fresh start would be good for both of us. Mom made it clear from the beginning that I'd need to contribute to household expenses, which was fine by me. I'd always planned on working anyway, and I wanted to save money for college. The problem was finding a job that would hire someone with limited work experience and no local references. After weeks of unsuccessful interviews, my mother's coworker mentioned that her boyfriend knew someone who owned a small motor inn about 40 minutes outside the city, right off Interstate 84. The owner was looking for someone to work the overnight shift at the front desk, and the pay was surprisingly good for what seemed like simple work. I didn't hesitate to apply. I'd always been more of a night person anyway, and the idea of having quiet hours to study or read was appealing. My mother agreed to let me borrow her car for work, as long as I had it back by 7 in the morning, when she needed it for her commute. The Pine Ridge Motor Inn was exactly what you'd expect from a roadside motel, single-story building, with rooms arranged in an L shape around a parking lot, with the office at the corner where the two wings met. The place had clearly been built in the 1960s or 70s and hadn't been updated much since then. Floral wallpaper, wood-paneled walls, and furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. My new boss, Mr. Henderson, was a man in his 50s who seemed tired most of the time. He explained that business was slow during the winter months. This was February 2017, and most nights I wouldn't see more than 1 or 2 guests, if any. Sometimes the place would be completely empty. The job seemed straightforward. Check in any late arrivals, answer the phone, and basically keep an eye on things until the day shift arrived. Mr. Henderson would work until 10 at night, then hand things over to me until 6 in the morning. Simple enough. My first night was a Tuesday, cold and drizzly like most Oregon winter evenings. Mr. Henderson showed me the basics, how to process check-ins, where the master keys were kept, and how to reach him by phone if there were any emergencies. When he left at 10, the place felt incredibly isolated. The office had large windows facing the parking lot and the highway beyond, but all I could see was darkness and the occasional set of headlights passing by. The silence was almost oppressive, not just quiet, but the kind of deep silence you only get in remote places far from any city. Brought some mobile games to help pass the time, since there was no reliable cell service and definitely no Wi-Fi. The landline phone system was ancient but functional, with buttons showing which rooms were occupied and allowing direct calls between the office and individual rooms. Around midnight, one of those buttons started blinking. Room 7 was calling the front desk. I looked at the registration book and didn't see anyone checked into that room. Mr. Henderson hadn't mentioned any guests, and I hadn't seen any cars in the parking lot when I arrived. I answered the phone. Pine Ridge front desk, how can I help you? Silence. I could hear the connection was active, but nobody spoke. Hello, is anyone there? Still nothing. After about 30 seconds, I hung up, assuming it was some kind of malfunction with the old phone system. But it left me feeling unsettled. 10 minutes later, room 7 called again. This time I didn't even get a chance to speak before I heard something that made my skin crawl, a woman's voice, crying softly, followed by what sounded like muffled laughter. Not happy laughter, but something desperate and broken. I hung up immediately, my hands shaking. Something was very wrong, but I didn't know what to do about it. I considered calling Mr. Henderson, but what would I tell him? That I was getting strange phone calls from an empty room instead. I decided to investigate myself. I grabbed the master key and a flashlight, locked the office behind me, and walked through the cold rain to room 7. The parking space in front was empty. No lights were on inside, and when I pressed my ear to the door, I couldn't hear anything. I knocked several times but got no response. Finally, I used the master key to open the door. The room was completely dark and appeared unoccupied. The bed was made, towels were neatly arranged in the bathroom, and everything looked exactly as housekeeping would have left it. I quickly locked the room and hurried back to the office, trying to convince myself that the old phone system was just malfunctioning. But as soon as I sat back down, room 7 called again. This time I let it ring for a while before answering. When I finally picked up, I heard that same woman's voice, but now she was speaking clearly. "Why won't you help me? Why won't anyone help me?" My blood turned to ice. The voice sounded young, desperate, and absolutely terrified. Before I could respond, the line went dead. I was too frightened to go back to that room, so I tried to distract myself with my phone games. But concentration was impossible. Every small sound made me jump, and I kept glancing at the phone system, waiting for room 7 to light up again. Around 2 in the morning, I heard the front door chime that indicated someone had entered the office. I looked up from my phone, expecting to see a late arrival, but the office was empty. I could see clearly through the glass doors. Nobody was there. That's when I noticed that the light in room 3 had turned on. I hadn't seen anyone drive up, hadn't heard a car door, but there was definitely movement in that room. I could see a shadow passing back and forth behind the curtained window. I grabbed my jacket and walked over to room 3, confused about how someone could have checked in without coming through the office. When I knocked on the door, a woman's voice answered, young, friendly, completely normal. "Just a minute, please." The door opened just a crack, revealing a girl who looked to be in her early 20s with long dark hair. She smiled at me through the narrow opening. "Is everything okay?" I asked. "I don't have a record of you checking in." "Oh, sorry about that. My boyfriend handled the registration earlier, but we got here really late. I hope we didn't disturb anyone." That didn't make sense. I'd been there since 10, and nobody had checked in. She seemed so normal, so genuinely apologetic, that I started to doubt my own memory. "No problem," I said. "Just wanted to make sure you had everything you needed." "We're fine, thank you so much, you're very kind." I walked back to the office feeling slightly better. At least there was a reasonable explanation for some of the strange things happening. But when I got back to my desk, the phone was ringing. "Mr. Henderson." "Sarah, is everything all right?" I had a strange feeling that I should check on you. "Everything's fine, Mr. Henderson. We actually have a guest tonight, room 3. They checked in late." There was a long pause. "What guest?" "Nobody made a reservation, and I didn't check anyone in before I left." "Well," she said, her boyfriend handled the registration." "Sarah, that's impossible. You're the only person there tonight. I specifically told you the place was empty." My stomach dropped. "I'll call you back," I said, and hung up. I immediately dialed room 3. The phone rang and rang, but nobody answered. Then I tried room 7, and to my horror, someone picked up on the first ring. "Hello." It was that same terrified woman's voice I'd heard before. I slammed the phone down and locked the office door. Something was very, very wrong, and I didn't want to be alone with whatever was happening in those rooms. Mr. Henderson arrived about 20 minutes later, looking worried and carrying a large flashlight. He went straight to room 3 and used his master key to open the door. I followed him, expecting to find the girl I'd spoken with earlier. The room was empty, completely untouched. The bed was still made, and there was no sign that anyone had been there. "Sarah," Mr. Henderson said quietly, "we need to talk." Back in the office, he explained that this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. Several night shift employees had quit over the years, all reporting similar experiences: phantom phone calls, mysterious guests who weren't really there, voices and sounds from empty rooms. "This place has a history," he said, looking exhausted. "My family built it back in 1968. For the first few years, everything was normal. But in 1974, something terrible happened in room 7. He told me about a young woman named Linda who had been staying at the motel with her boyfriend. Late one night, the boyfriend had gone out to get food, leaving Linda alone. When he returned, he found the door to their room open and Linda missing. Her body was discovered the next morning in the woods behind the motel. She'd been murdered, and the killer was never found. Ever since then, strange things happen here, especially at night. The phone calls, the voices, sometimes people see a young woman walking around the parking lot. I've tried everything, had the place blessed, brought in mediums, even considered tearing it down. Nothing works, Mr. Henderson looked at me with genuine sadness. I can't ask you to stay if this bothers you. I understand if you want to quit. Most people do. I thought about it for a moment. Part of me wanted to run and never come back. But another part of me felt something like pity for Linda, if that's who was trying to communicate. She seemed so scared, so desperate for help. Maybe she just needs someone to acknowledge her, I suggested. Someone who isn't afraid to listen. Mr. Henderson shook his head. I've tried that, talked to her, tried to convince her to move on. It doesn't work. She's been here for over 40 years and she's not going anywhere. In the end, I couldn't handle it. The idea of spending night after night in that place, knowing I might encounter Linda's spirit at any moment, was too much. I thanked Mr. Henderson for the opportunity, but told him I had to find other work. As I was leaving that morning, I took one last look at room 7. For just a moment, I thought I saw a face in the window, a young woman with sad eyes, watching me go. But when I blinked, there was nothing there. I never went back to the Pine Ridge Motor Inn. I found other work, eventually saved enough money for college, and tried to put that night behind me. But sometimes, especially when I'm alone late at night, I think about Linda. Still trapped in that room, still calling for help that never comes. I wonder if she's still there, making those phone calls, appearing to night shift workers who don't understand what they're experiencing. Part of me hopes she's found peace, but part of me suspects she's still waiting, still trying to tell someone what happened to her on that terrible night so many years ago. Some places hold on to their tragedies, and some spirits refuse to let go of the world they knew. The Pine Ridge Motor Inn was both, a place where the past and present existed side by side, where the living and the dead shared the same space without ever truly connecting. I hope whoever works there now is braver than I was. Maybe someone will finally find a way to help Linda find the peace she's been searching for all these years. My name is Sarah, and this happened in 2018 when I was hospitalized at Mercy General Hospital in Detroit. I had been there for about 3 weeks due to a car accident while driving with my best friend. The recovery was going well. I could already walk on my own and move freely around the room. The doctor was waiting for some final tests and studies to fully confirm that everything was in order. He mentioned that sometimes, even when I didn't notice it, those accidents left sequelae that brought problems in the future, and they wanted to avoid or anticipate that. I had already become friends with some of the nurses, and my friends visited me 3 or 4 times a week. I'm aware that some of them did it because of the beautiful girls on the medical staff. They were undeniably gorgeous. We joked about it, and luckily, the nurses allowed my friends to stay in the room even though there were more than 2, exceeding the limit allowed during visiting hours. Despite the good treatment, they didn't allow anyone to stay with me at night, not even in the waiting room on the first floor. I didn't understand why. They just said those were hospital rules, and my parents accepted it, though reluctantly. It wasn't a problem anyway. It's just that they preferred to be with me all the time and not have to wait until morning to come in and see how I was doing. I prayed for those tests to come out as soon as possible and for them to discharge me. Those weeks there seemed eternal, just like the extensive days. Then came an afternoon when we were notified that the doctor who had been following my recovery process was replaced at the last moment, and another one arrived. He was incredibly friendly with me and my mother. In fact, he gave us hope that I could stay with her, but not that night. He said he would talk to the director so that the rest of my days there would be spent accompanied by someone at night. At least you could see his interest in the comfort of his patients, or mine specifically. My mother joked saying that he liked me and all that, but I didn't care. I was in love with a guy from the university, so the doctor was completely out of the question. Night came and he himself told my mother that she couldn't stay, but the next night she could. He already had everything arranged with the director and had given the order. It was just a matter of waiting one more day, and that was it. So the situation seemed fine to me. The thing is, everything was going too well, and the night seemed so normal that not doubting for even a second was the biggest mistake of my life. The clock struck midnight when the doctor entered, somewhat hysterical, telling me that they had approved a last-minute hospital transfer that would take place immediately. I was, of course, alarmed because I wasn't expecting anything like that. I tried to notify my mother through my cell phone, but the doctor was faster. He put it in a bag and said they would give me all my belongings there. He removed the safety from my bed's wheels and then took me out of the room, wheeling me through the hallways. I found it curious because I couldn't see any other nurse or anyone else. Besides, my body felt very heavy. Even though I wanted to scream, it was impossible. I had the impression that I was seconds away from fainting, and that intensified the fear. All I could think was that something must have been in the IV they had given me. We took a few minutes. We went up an elevator, and he took me to a very secluded room where the lights barely worked. He didn't put me in with the bed. He removed the IV, carried me, and left me on the floor. It wasn't a room like the others, but a very small one where the bed would take up too much space. I could barely sit up when the doctor turned on the light, and before leaving, told me that bad luck had knocked on my door, and that if I were to scream, then he himself would come to close my eyes permanently. He left, and that's when I realized that beside me was another girl with her knees drawn up against her body, trembling, leaning against the wall. At the back of the room was a corpse of another woman wearing nurse's clothing. The smell was just starting to concentrate, and the girl told me he had killed her just that morning. I asked her who that man was, and she confessed that she had discovered that this supposed doctor worked for a human trafficking network that was in charge of replacing patients. They hid them in that place so we couldn't be found, and as the days passed, be reported as missing when we would already be very far away in another country by then, or perhaps dead. She also revealed that one of those who discovered him was the one he murdered. All of this made me understand that we weren't going to get out of there alive. I wanted to stand up to open the door, but my legs barely responded. I told her to do it, but she was so terrified and trembling that she could barely tell me that story. She shook her head at everything I told her to do. 2 hours later, the doctor came back with a nurse. She was the one who medicated us to be able to take us from our room to that dark place. The evil in her eyes, the way she spoke, and how she treated us as if we were objects made me understand that she wasn't lying, and that her wickedness surpassed everything I knew. She left, locked the door, and that's when the one who was with me decided to stand up and try to open it, but it was in vain. She couldn't do it. I was regaining my strength and tried to help her, but it was useless. Hours passed, and it became afternoon. I despaired to the point where I began to scream. The other girl cried, but then joined me with her screams. The ray of light came when someone appeared running, saying they would look for a way to get us out of there. He introduced himself with a pipe with which he forced the lock with about 10 blows. It was the brother of the girl who was there with me, who had decided to visit his sister outside of visiting hours secretly. And when he didn't see her, he knew something bad was happening. So he decided to look for her until he found her. We told him everything and immediately called the police. We waited for the officers on the first floor of the hospital. They found the corpse in that room and immediately arrested the doctor, who never confessed anything. It was clear that he wasn't doing it alone, and they also put that nurse, who helped him in his crimes, in jail. Since then, I affirm and reiterate that a ghost can scare, traumatize, and do whatever they want. But the greatest danger will always be represented by another human being who is completely conscious and in their right mind, true pure evil. It was the year 2016 when I found myself hospitalized at St. Mary's Medical Center in Phoenix. After the bus I was on suffered an accident when it was hit by another vehicle on the side where I was sitting. My right arm had to be put in a cast due to a fracture, and I was getting constant dizzy spells so strong that they had to give me medication, not only for the pain, but also to make me sleep. My family was more than worried, and few could visit me because visiting hours conflicted with their work schedules. Sometimes an aunt would come, other days a cousin. Some days I spent alone and notified everyone through my cell phone. It was tedious having to do almost everything with one hand, and the cast would stay with me for a good while, even after they discharged me. The worst of all was the doctor. He always scolded me for something, sometimes for the position I was sitting in or the poor condition in which I maintained the IV injected from my hand. He drove me crazy, but there was no other option but to put up with it. Sometimes he scared me by telling me they needed to do more tests, and that some they had already done didn't reveal anything good, and that I should prepare for the worst. I don't know what kind of doctor gives a patient a diagnosis in that manner, but I had to endure it. I didn't want to tell my mother anything, not even over the phone, because knowing her very well, she was capable of leaving work just to confront that doctor and put him in his place. I would have undoubtedly enjoyed that, but I didn't want to generate problems either at the hospital or at Mom's work. So I found distraction in my cell phone and my books, which I read at incredible speed. After all, I had nothing else to do. Finally, that night arrived, the one that changed everything. The bitter and disrespectful doctor entered the room with a serious look. I thought he was about to scold me or tell me how much I annoyed him. Seriously, he was unbearable. But instead of that, he told me he already had the results of all the tests, and that although I wasn't presenting symptoms, it was revealed that the impact to my head had caused severe damage that would end up causing a brain hemorrhage at any moment, without anything being able to be done about it. I burst into tears in front of him, and he tried to console me by telling me that anyway, there was a probability that it wouldn't happen in those days, but months or years later. He added that an operation was impossible because then the risk would be greater. He left and returned 2 hours later. He found me crying uncontrollably. I didn't even want to tell my mother anything. The doctor entered again, giving me the news that my father had just suffered a terrible accident and that the paramedics reported they didn't think he could be saved. My pain tripled. I began to cry and even scream without caring about anything. That doctor hugged me, consoled me, and then whispered in my ear, asking if I was capable of doing everything necessary to save my father. I told him yes, and then he explained that there was a way I could save not only my father's life, but also mine. I dried my tears and asked him how, to which he responded that if I sold my soul to the devil through him, then he would take care of extending our years of life and prosperity, enjoying good health and all that. I was seriously surprised, but he immediately made it clear that I couldn't tell anyone anything, and was obligated to respond at that precise moment. He knew how to do it. I found myself immersed in a state of incredible sadness. I wasn't being reasonable and wasn't thinking about absolutely anything. I told him yes, nodding my head, and then he removed my IV, helped me get down from the bed, and told me to accompany him to a room he already had prepared exclusively for all that. None of the nurses said anything. They looked at us as if walking with him around there was normal, something that happened habitually. Just as he said, he took me to a secluded room that was illuminated with candles and had red walls. In the center was painted a white pentagram, and he told me to kneel in the center. I did so. He handed me some sheets with prayers in a language I didn't know, but it specified how to pronounce them correctly. The doctor was clear. He told me that for everything to go well, I had to say every last word and then spit, while maintaining the petition I would make to the devil in my mind, and he would take care of fulfilling it. I began reading slowly, and within seconds I observed how the fire of the candles intensified, reaching over 3 feet in height. The heat increased to the point where the air conditioning was no longer noticeable. Not only that, but my body began to feel cold at the same time as I was sweating and feeling hot. I was trembling, white smoke was coming out of my mouth, and shortly after, I began to hear voices telling me to read faster, that they were anxious to have my soul, and asking me if I really wanted my father to continue living, to read those sheets once and for all. I was crying while doing it, thinking that this was a very bad idea. I was missing only 4 paragraphs, and by that point, I was already seeing people inside the room out of the corner of my eye with red eyes and disgusting, diabolical smiles. They terrified me, and the doctor told me not to pay attention to them, that they were just witnesses and all that. The white pentagram turned reddish, and the candles were being consumed. With only words left to finish, the headache arrived intensified to the maximum and caused me to faint. I woke up in my hospital room bed. My parents were there, and beside me was another doctor. They told me the previous one had resigned and left without saying anything more. I told them everything. They called the police, and they found the room with those things and satanic symbols. However, they said that forcing another person to sell their soul wasn't considered a crime in the penal code, and therefore the complaint wasn't valid. They discharged me, and I swore that from that moment on, I wouldn't return to a hospital. The last time was when they removed my cast. I was saved from selling my soul only because, for some strange reason I don't know, I fainted, and that doctor decided to leave me in my room, hoping I wouldn't remember anything. These things happen where you least expect them, when one is most vulnerable to performing macabre acts. My name is Ricardo, and this story happened several years ago during a road trip with my wife. It's not something I enjoy remembering, but sometimes when I think about how different things could have been, if I'd made just one different choice. I get a chill that runs through my entire body. I've always loved long-distance driving. There's something hypnotic about being on the highway in the early morning hours, the broken white lines reflecting the headlights, music playing softly while my wife sleeps in the passenger seat, and the peaceful feeling of making progress through the night toward our destination. But that particular night, despite trying to stay relaxed, I had an uneasy feeling I couldn't shake. Something felt wrong, though I couldn't put my finger on what it was. We'd left San Antonio that evening, heading toward a weekend getaway in Austin. We'd stopped a couple of times for food and to stretch our legs, and by the time midnight rolled around, I decided we should make one final stop before checking into our hotel. We found a gas station off Highway 35, one of those rural stations that serves truckers and late-night travelers. There was an 18-wheeler parked near the diesel pumps and a couple of other cars. Enough activity that we didn't feel completely isolated. My wife went to use the restroom while I went into the convenience store to buy coffee and some snacks for the remainder of our drive. Everything seemed normal, just a typical late-night stop at a highway gas station. The kid working behind the counter looked like he was barely out of high school, tired and bored. The kind of employee who's counting the minutes until his shift ends. He rang up my purchases without much conversation, barely looking up from his phone. That's when a man entered the store. He was tall and thin, wearing a dark jacket with disheveled hair like he'd been on the road for days. Instead of browsing the aisles or approaching the counter, he walked directly up to me. "Hey buddy, I could really use a favor," he said, standing uncomfortably close. "My car broke down a few miles back, and I need to get to the next town to find a mechanic. Any chance you could give me a ride?" It wasn't unusual to encounter stranded motorists on highways, but something about his approach bothered me. He didn't seem desperate or nervous like someone who'd actually been stranded would be. His demeanor was too confident, too insistent. I gave him a polite smile and said I was sorry, but I was traveling with my wife and couldn't help him. He didn't back off. "Come on, man, it's just a short ride. It won't take you out of your way." I shook my head. "I really can't. I hope you find someone who can help." The guy's expression darkened slightly. "It's dangerous being stuck out here at night, you know. You'd be doing a good deed." There was something in his tone that made my skin crawl. This wasn't a request anymore. It felt like pressure, like he was trying to manipulate me into compliance. Every instinct I had was telling me to get away from this person. "I'm sorry, but I can't help you," I said firmly, then grabbed my purchases and headed for the door. As I walked out, I could feel him watching me. When I glanced back through the window, he was standing there with this weird, almost amused expression on his face, like he found my refusal entertaining rather than disappointing. My wife was already waiting by our car. I didn't want to worry her, so I didn't mention the encounter. We got in, I started the engine, and we continued toward Austin. Within a couple of hours, we were safely checked into our hotel, and the incident had faded to the back of my mind. The next morning, we went down to the hotel restaurant for breakfast. I turned on the news while my wife was getting ready, just to check the weather and see what was happening in the area. That's when I saw the story that made my blood run cold. The news was reporting a triple homicide that had occurred during the night at a gas station. According to the report, 2 employees and a truck driver had been killed sometime in the early morning hours. The truck was found abandoned near the station, with the driver stabbed to death inside the cab. As they showed aerial footage of the crime scene, I recognized it immediately. It was the same gas station where we'd stopped, the same place where I'd bought coffee and been approached by that strange man. The worst part came when they described the suspect they were looking for. A tall, thin man in a dark jacket who had been seen at several gas stations in the area asking for rides. It was him, the same person who had approached me in the store. My wife noticed my expression and asked what was wrong. I couldn't speak for a moment. Finally, I turned up the volume and showed her the news report. The realization hit us both at the same time. If I had said yes to his request, if I had agreed to give him a ride, we would likely be dead. We would have become two more victims in what the police were calling a string of highway murders. For weeks after that, I couldn't stop thinking about it. What would have happened if I'd been more trusting? If I'd ignored my instincts and tried to be helpful? The police report mentioned that the killer had been using the same approach, posing as a stranded motorist to get victims to let their guard down. The investigation continued for months. Police found evidence linking the suspect to similar crimes at gas stations throughout Texas and neighboring states. There were testimonials from other people who had encountered him asking for rides. But unlike us, not everyone had been lucky enough to say no. They never caught him. The case eventually went cold, filed away with dozens of other unsolved highway murders. For all I know, he's still out there somewhere, still approaching late-night travelers with that same request, still waiting for someone to make the wrong choice. Now, whenever I stop at a gas station late at night, I'm hyper-aware of everyone around me. I scan faces, looking for anyone who might be watching too intently or approaching with too much familiarity. I can't help wondering if one day I'll see him again, if he'll remember me as the one who got away. The thing that haunts me most is how normal he seemed at first. If you'd seen him from a distance, you'd think he was just another traveler having car trouble. It wasn't until he got close, until you could see something off in his eyes and hear the manipulation in his voice, that you realized you were dealing with something dangerous. That night taught me to trust my instincts completely, even when it means potentially disappointing someone who might genuinely need help. Because sometimes the difference between kindness and survival comes down to a single word: no. And sometimes that one word is all that stands between you and becoming another unsolved case on a detective's desk. I need to share something that's been weighing on my conscience for years. I can't give you my real name. You'll understand why as this story unfolds. But I can tell you that what I'm about to describe happened at a major hospital in Chicago, where I worked part-time in the morgue. It wasn't my primary job, but I had experience from my previous work in forensic pathology, and the hospital was always short-staffed in that department. The extra money didn't hurt either, especially when covering shifts that other people didn't want to take. What I'm about to tell you involves a practice that I witnessed there, something that still makes my stomach turn when I think about it. It concerned the unclaimed bodies, usually homeless individuals or people who had been estranged from their families for so long that no one came looking for them. There was an unspoken arrangement between certain hospital administrators and what I can only describe as procurement specialists, people who would arrive with official-looking paperwork and take these unclaimed bodies away. The supervisor who trained me, a man named Frank who had been working there for over 30 years, explained it to me in hushed tones during one of my first shifts. "They take parts," he said simply. "Arms, legs, whatever they need to make other bodies look presentable for families who can afford to pay for a perfect funeral. Rich folks don't want to see their loved ones' missing limbs in an open casket." The process was disturbingly clinical. They would remove limbs from the unclaimed bodies and attach them to paying customers who had died in accidents or from diseases that had required amputations. It was all about maintaining appearances, about money and social status. Frank told me that while most of the staff disapproved of this practice, it came from high up the chain of command, and there was nothing we could do to stop it. But he also warned me about something else, something that made even the most hardened morgue workers dread these transactions. "When they take pieces of someone," Frank said, "that person knows, and they're not happy about it. Every body reclaims what's theirs eventually." I thought he was just sharing morgue folklore, the kind of ghost stories that circulate in any job dealing with death. I was wrong. The first time I witnessed the aftermath of one of these procurement visits was on a Tuesday night in November. An elderly man had been brought back after they'd taken his left leg. The paperwork said he'd been gone for 3 hours, and when we placed him in one of our refrigerated drawers, everything seemed normal. About an hour later, as my colleague James and I were finishing up our paperwork, we heard it, a rhythmic banging coming from the wall of drawers where we stored the bodies. The sound was unmistakable. Someone was pounding on the inside of one of the metal compartments. But it wasn't the desperate hammering of someone trapped alive. This was different, methodical, angry, like someone demanding to be let out. The metallic reverberations echoed through the room with a force that made both of us freeze. James, who had been working there for 8 years, walked over to the drawer where the elderly man was stored. His hand hovered over the handle as the banging continued. "Third time this has happened to me," he muttered, but I could see the fear in his eyes. "Never gets easier." He pulled the drawer open, and what we saw made my blood run cold. The body was thrashing violently inside the confined space, his remaining leg kicking against the metal walls, his arms flailing as if he were having a seizure. But his eyes were closed, and he wasn't breathing. We had to restrain the body and document everything carefully. Ironically, we were more afraid of getting in trouble for any additional marks on the corpse than we were of the supernatural implications of what we were witnessing. The procurement people kept detailed records, and any unexplained injuries would lead to questions we couldn't answer. This became a regular occurrence. Whenever a body was returned missing parts, we knew we were in for a difficult night. The banging would start, and it wouldn't stop until we opened the drawer and acknowledged what was happening. Sometimes it went on for hours. But the worst case I ever encountered involved a child. A 7-year-old boy had been found on the streets, another victim of the city's homeless crisis. According to the paperwork, he'd been abandoned and had been living rough for months before succumbing to pneumonia. No family came forward, and after the required waiting period, the procurement team took him away. When they brought him back that night, he was missing his right forearm. The surgical removal was clean, professional, but seeing a child's body mutilated like that, it changed something in me. I was taking some medical waste to the disposal area when I heard running footsteps behind me in the hallway. I turned to move aside, thinking it was one of my colleagues, but the hallway was empty. The footsteps continued past me, small, quick steps, like a child running, and they headed straight for the morgue entrance. When I got back to the morgue, I found James staring wide-eyed toward the back of the room where we kept the gurneys. "Did you hear those footsteps?" I asked. "Footsteps?" James shook his head. "I just saw the kid run in here and hide behind that cabinet, the one who came in without the arm." We both knew that was impossible. The child's body was secured in one of our refrigerated units, but James wasn't the type to imagine things, and I had heard those running footsteps myself. We decided to leave the morgue and wait in the staff break room until our shift ended. But as we were gathering our things, one of the maintenance workers, a guy named Mike, who handled the disposal of medical waste, burst through the door. "You're not going to believe what just happened," he said, his voice shaking. He rolled up his pant leg to show us a small but clearly defined bite mark on his calf. "Something bit me in the hallway. I looked down and saw a kid, but he was too far away, running toward the morgue. There's no way a living child could be down here." The bite mark was unmistakably from a child's teeth, small but deep enough to break the skin. James pulled out a small crucifix he always carried and hung it on the handle of the refrigerated unit where the boy's body was stored. The disturbances stopped immediately, but he had to leave the crucifix there for several days, until the body was finally claimed by a distant relative who came forward. The most disturbing incident I witnessed involved a man who had been returned missing his entire left arm from the shoulder down. Two young workers on the evening shift, one brand new, the other a college student doing community service, had been seeing someone opening the morgue door, peering in at them, and then disappearing when they tried to follow. This went on for hours. The figure would appear at the door, look around the room as if searching for something, then vanish the moment they approached. Sometimes they'd see him at the windows, watching them from outside. They called security, then the police, but no one could find any trace of an intruder. When the supervisor arrived and heard their description of the man, including the detail that he was missing his left arm, he immediately understood what was happening. He took them to the back of the morgue and showed them the body they'd been working with. "That's him," both workers said in unison, before backing away in horror. The supervisor later told me that this kind of thing had been happening for years, but it was getting worse. The procurement visits were becoming more frequent, and the supernatural incidents were escalating along with them. "Every body reclaims what's theirs," he repeated Frank's old saying, "and they're getting angrier about it." I left that job not long after the incident with the child. I couldn't continue to be part of a system that treated human remains with such disrespect, and I couldn't handle the psychological toll of dealing with the supernatural consequences. But I still think about those people sometimes. The unclaimed dead who had pieces of themselves stolen to make other corpses look whole for wealthy families. I wonder if they ever found peace, or if they're still wandering those hospital corridors, searching for what was taken from them. They say you should never steal from the dead, not their belongings, not their dignity, and certainly not parts of their bodies. What we witnessed in that morgue was proof that some violations are so profound that they echo beyond death itself. The thought that somewhere out there, People are buried with arms and legs that don't belong to them, while the original owners remain incomplete and restless, is something that haunts me to this day. Some boundaries should never be crossed, and some prices are too high to pay, no matter how much money is involved. My name is Detective Manuel Santos, and I recently retired from the Phoenix Police Department after 32 years of service. Throughout my career, I've investigated murders, drug deals, gang violence, and every kind of human cruelty imaginable. But nothing in my experience prepared me for what happened during a routine welfare check in the winter of 2018. I was working the night shift with my partner, Detective Lisa Chen, when we received an unusual call around 11:15 p.m. Dispatch told us they'd been getting reports of strange sounds coming from a house in an isolated area on the outskirts of Scottsdale. The caller had hung up before providing details, but the emergency operator had managed to trace the call to a specific address. What made the call particularly concerning was that it wasn't the first one from that location. Over the past 3 weeks, dispatch had received 4 similar calls, always late at night, always consisting of someone making distressed sounds, but never speaking clearly. Each time, patrol units had been sent to check, but they'd found the house apparently empty, with no signs of disturbance. Lisa and I decided to handle this one personally. We'd been partners for 8 years, and we had a reputation for being thorough with difficult cases. Something about the pattern of calls bothered us both. It felt like someone was trying to communicate, but couldn't or wouldn't speak directly. The address led us to a rundown ranch-style house at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by desert scrubland and rocky hills. The nearest neighbors were at least half a mile away, which explained why previous units might not have done extensive investigations. It was the kind of place where someone could disappear without anyone noticing for weeks. As soon as we pulled up, we knew something was wrong. The yard was overrun with cats, not just a few strays, but dozens of them. They were everywhere, sitting on the roof, clustered around the front porch, hiding under an old pickup truck in the driveway. Most unsettling was how they were all facing the house, as if watching something inside. The property showed clear signs of neglect. Dead plants filled cracked ceramic pots, the lawn was brown and overgrown with weeds, and newspapers were piled up by the front door, some so old they'd turned yellow from sun exposure. Paint was peeling from the house's exterior walls, and several windows had boards nailed over them. Lisa approached the front door while I checked the perimeter. She knocked and identified us as police officers, but got no response. The cats scattered when I walked around back, but I noticed something strange. They didn't go far. They regrouped about 20 feet away and continued their vigil, watching the house with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I radioed our position to dispatch and requested information on the property owner. While waiting for a response, we tried the front door and found it unlocked. Lisa called out again, explaining that we were conducting a welfare check and needed to make sure everyone inside was safe. That's when we heard it, a low moaning sound coming from somewhere deep in the house. It wasn't quite human, but it wasn't animal either. It was the sound of profound suffering, the kind that makes your bones ache just hearing it. We drew our weapons and entered the house. The smell hit us immediately, a combination of decay, mold, and something else I couldn't identify. Cat urine was part of it, but there was an underlying odor that reminded me of the morgue. The interior was a maze of newspaper stacks, empty food containers, and cat supplies. Paths had been carved through the debris, leading from room to room like tunnels. Our flashlights revealed walls covered with strange symbols drawn in what looked like charcoal or burned wood. Candles were placed throughout the house, most burned down to stubs, their wax forming bizarre patterns on every available surface. We followed the moaning sound toward the back of the house. In what had once been a bedroom, we found the source, but it wasn't what we expected. There, lying in an old bathtub that had been moved from the bathroom into the bedroom, was a human skeleton. The bones were yellow with age and showed signs of having been there for months, possibly longer. Surrounding the bathtub were dozens of candles, photographs of various people, and handwritten notes in what appeared to be Spanish mixed with symbols I didn't recognize. Lisa immediately called for the coroner and crime scene unit while I secured the area. But we still hadn't found whoever had been making the welfare check calls, and that moaning sound was continuing from somewhere else in the house. We searched every room methodically. In what had been the kitchen, we found shelves lined with jars containing unidentifiable substances, dried herbs, and what looked like animal bones. The refrigerator was unplugged and empty except for more candles, and a collection of personal items, jewelry, photographs, locks of hair tied with ribbons. The living room had been converted into some kind of ritual space. The furniture was pushed against the walls, and a large pentagram was painted on the floor in dark red paint. Around its perimeter were more candles, bowls containing ashes, and hand-drawn maps showing locations throughout the Phoenix area. We were photographing the scene when we heard footsteps in the hallway. Lisa and I positioned ourselves defensively and called out, identifying ourselves again as police officers. An elderly woman appeared in the doorway, Hispanic, probably in her 70s, wearing a stained white nightgown and clutching a black shawl around her shoulders. She looked at us with eyes that seemed far older than her years, eyes that held secrets and knowledge that no person should possess. When Lisa asked if she was the one who had been calling for help, the woman shook her head slowly and pointed toward the bedroom where we'd found the skeleton. She called, the woman said, in heavily accented English. She wanted to be found. That's when we realized we were looking at the property owner alive, while her skeletal remains were lying in the next room. The impossibility of the situation hit us both at the same time, but before we could process it fully, the woman turned and walked back down the hallway. We followed her, but she seemed to vanish into the maze of debris. We searched for 20 minutes, calling out, but found no trace of her. It was as if she had simply melted into the shadows. The crime scene unit arrived and began processing the house. The skeleton was indeed that of an elderly Hispanic woman, and dental records eventually confirmed her identity as Maria Esperanza Gutierrez, age 73, who had been reported missing by social services 6 months earlier. According to the case file, Maria had been known to local authorities as someone who practiced folk magic and claimed to perform spiritual services for clients throughout the Phoenix area. Several people had filed complaints over the years, claiming she had defrauded them or that her services had caused them harm. But there were also testimonials from others who swore that Maria's interventions had helped them with everything from relationship problems to financial difficulties. The general consensus was that she was a curandera, a traditional healer, but one who had possibly crossed lines into darker practices. The investigation revealed that Maria had been operating what essentially amounted to a supernatural consulting business. We found client lists, appointment books, and detailed records of payments for various services. Some entries were innocuous: healing rituals, blessing ceremonies, spiritual cleansings. Others were more troubling references to binding specific individuals, removing obstacles from people's lives, and calling upon the Dark Ones for justice. What disturbed me most were the newspaper clippings we found throughout the house. They documented deaths, accidents, and misfortunes that had befallen people throughout the greater Phoenix area over the past several years. Many of these articles were annotated in Maria's handwriting, with dates that corresponded to entries in her appointment books. The patterns suggested that Maria's clients had been paying her to cause harm to their enemies, and based on the newspaper evidence, her methods had been terrifyingly effective. We counted at least 40 documented cases where someone had died or suffered serious misfortune within weeks of Maria receiving payment to handle them. The medical examiner determined that Maria had died of natural causes, heart failure brought on by advanced diabetes and malnutrition. But that didn't explain who had been making the welfare check calls, or who I had seen in that hallway. The house was eventually demolished by the county after it was determined to be structurally unsound and a health hazard. The cats scattered to other parts of the desert, but locals say they still gather at the empty lot on certain nights, sitting in perfect circles and staring at where the house used to stand. I retired 6 months after that investigation, partly because I couldn't shake the feeling that we had stumbled into something far beyond our understanding or ability to handle. Maria Gutierrez had opened doors that were meant to stay closed, and even though she was dead, those doors remained open. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about that elderly woman in the white nightgown. Was she Maria's spirit, trying to ensure her body was found and given proper burial? Or was she something else entirely? Something that had been living in that house, alongside Maria, feeding off the dark energy of her practices. I never found out who made those welfare check calls, but I suspect it was Maria herself, using whatever supernatural abilities she possessed to reach out from beyond death. She wanted to be found, wanted her story to be told, wanted someone to understand the price she had paid for trafficking with forces that exist beyond our world. The case officially remains closed, but I know there are still people out there who were Maria's clients, people who made bargains with her that haven't been fully paid. And somewhere in the desert darkness around Phoenix, I believe Maria's influence continues, waiting for the right circumstances to manifest again. Some doors once opened can never be completely closed. My name is Raul, and several years ago I worked the night shift at a truck stop convenience store with my coworker Diana. We were both just trying to make ends meet, working a job that was monotonous but paid the bills. The night shift was usually quiet. Most of our customers were long-haul truckers passing through, stopping for coffee, fuel, and maybe some snacks before continuing their cross-country routes. They'd come and go without much interaction, which suited us fine. But from the beginning, There was something unsettling about that place after dark. It started with small things sounds that didn't have obvious sources. We'd hear knocking from inside the walk-in coolers, items falling off shelves when no one was nearby, and what sounded like whispered conversations coming from the storage room in back. At first, we assumed it was rats or some other pest problem. Old buildings make noise, pipes settle, refrigeration units have their own sounds. We didn't think much of it and just did our jobs. But as weeks passed, the sounds became more specific and harder to ignore. Sometimes it sounded like footsteps in the storage area when we knew no one was back there. Other times, we'd hear what seemed like muffled voices having conversations just beyond the range of understanding. There were nights when Diana and I would stay close to the front counter, avoiding the back of the store unless absolutely necessary. We never talked about it directly, but we both felt the same uneasiness about those areas. The night everything changed, I was reorganizing inventory in the storage room. We'd received a large shipment of soft drinks, and I was moving cases around to make room for everything. That's when I noticed something odd about the floor. As I moved a heavy case of sodas, I heard a hollow sound beneath my feet. I stopped and knocked on the floor with my knuckles, definitely hollow underneath, like there was an empty space below. I called Diana over to take a look. We cleared some more items away and found that one of the floor tiles was loose. With some effort, we managed to pry it up. I shined my phone's flashlight into the opening, and what I saw made my stomach turn. There were bones down there, human bones. My first thought was that maybe they were very old, from some previous use of the building. But as I looked more carefully, I realized these weren't ancient remains. There were pieces of clothing still attached, and the bones looked relatively recent. Diana immediately said we should cover it back up and pretend we'd never seen it. "We don't want to get involved in this," she said, backing away from the opening. But I couldn't look away. There was something deeply disturbing about how the bones were arranged. They weren't just scattered randomly. They seemed to have been placed there deliberately, with care, like someone had taken time to position them. For a moment, I felt like the air in the storage room became thicker, harder to breathe. Diana kept insisting that we should close it up and forget about it, and eventually, that's what we did. But after that discovery, the atmosphere in the store changed completely. The unexplained sounds became more frequent and more aggressive. Instead of occasional knocks and whispers, we started hearing what sounded like objects being dragged across floors, long groaning sounds, and the constant feeling that someone was standing just outside our line of sight. One night, while Diana was restocking the refrigerated section, I heard her scream. I ran to see what was wrong and found her staring at one of the glass doors with a look of absolute terror. "Someone was looking at me from inside the cooler," she whispered. A face pressed against the glass from the inside. I checked the cooler thoroughly, but there was no one there. No way for anyone to get inside without us seeing them. But Diana swore she'd seen someone watching her from among the milk cartons and energy drinks. After that night, we both decided we'd had enough. We quit without giving notice, without explaining to our boss what we'd discovered. We were afraid to tell anyone what we'd found, worried about getting involved in something that could be dangerous for us. Years later, I learned what had really happened at that truck stop. The owner eventually discovered the remains we'd found and called the police. The investigation revealed that the bones belonged to two people who had been murdered decades earlier. The most disturbing part of the police report was the identity of the killer. A former employee of the truck stop who had worked there long before Diana and I were hired. This person had used the storage room as a hunting ground, targeting lone travelers and truckers who stopped during overnight hours. According to the investigation, the killer's method was to terrorize victims before attacking them. He would hide in the storage areas, making sounds to create paranoia and fear. He enjoyed the psychological aspect of the hunt as much as the eventual violence. Reading that report made me reconsider everything Diana and I had experienced. Were those sounds we heard just echoes of past events, some kind of residual haunting? Or was something more active at work, replaying the terror that had once filled those rooms? I think about those late-night shifts sometimes, about the sounds that seemed to come from nowhere, and the constant feeling of being watched. I wonder if we were hearing the same sounds those victims heard in their final moments, if we were experiencing some fragment of the fear they felt. Diana and I had assumed we were encountering something supernatural, but the truth was somehow worse. The horror we sensed wasn't from ghosts or spirits. It was the lingering presence of real evil, the kind of malevolence that leaves permanent marks on a place. Some locations hold onto their history in ways that go beyond memory. They absorb the emotions and experiences that occurred there, especially the most intense ones. And sometimes, people sensitive enough to pick up on those remnants can feel the echo of terrible things, even decades after they happened. I never went back to that truck stop, and I heard it eventually close down. But I'll never forget the feeling of that storage room, or the way the air seemed to carry whispers of things that should have stayed buried. Some discoveries change how you see the world, and not always for the better. You made it to the end of the stories. That means it's the perfect time to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you haven't already, leave a like and drop a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have a great time relaxing, and good night.